Good morning and welcome to the AI and Internet of Things tour, part of Geneva tours of trying to guide us through the landscape of digital developments in Geneva. My name is Jovan Kurbalija. I'm Director of Diplo Foundation and Head of Geneva Internet Platform, and I'm very, very happy to welcome you today on Monday morning. I hope you're fresh after the summer break, full of energy, creative energy, which we'll need today to connect as many dots as possible. You already saw in the video on the skies of Geneva, we try to connect dots among different organizations. I'm here, as you can see, my background is here with the flags of the UN member states. And we may start our discussion on AI in Geneva scene by also identifying patterns among these flags. What are the dominant patterns? And as you know, this is one of the underlying technique of artificial intelligence, identifying patterns in the diverse set of data. Therefore, next time, when you walk to the Palais, think about the flags and think about patterns in flags, shapes, colors, common colors used by different countries. Therefore, this is a prelude for our discussion today. How to connect the dots, how to identify patterns for better cooperation at Geneva scene. I'm very honored to have today an excellent panel with us. I will introduce them and then we'll dive deep into discussion on Geneva landscape, Geneva AI landscape. We have with us today Dr. Chezub Lee, Director of Telecommunication Standardization Bureau of the International Telecommunication Union in Geneva. Welcome, Chezub. We have Ambassador Amandeep Gill, Director of Global Health Center Project on International Digital Health, there at the Graduate Institute in Geneva, experienced diplomats and specialists in AI and digital issues. We have with us François Guichard, Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Now it's a long title, but basically person who is discussing what we should do with automated, autonomous and connected vehicles and cars. What are the standards? What are the policies? Mr. Samir Shaukan, Director of United Nations International Computing Center. Samir is trying to connect many dots in the UN system, which is not always easy. But as you can see, he still keeps his smile, and I'm sure he will bring us what are the dots that we can connect on the Geneva scene. This session is co-moderated with my colleague, Dr. Katarina Hone, Director of Research at Diplo. And Katarina will bring us inputs from the broader research on AI and diplomacy. What concerns diplomats and policymakers and how Geneva can reply to these concerns. We have a special guest today. It's Anja Djajic. She's a research intern on artificial intelligence at IPFL, based here at the Biotech campus, just around the corner from our office. This is the sort of our landscape for today, for very engaging and interesting discussion. Our panelists already made quite in-depth podcasts, and they're ready to join us to try through brainstorming, in this case, human intelligence, discover these patterns in Geneva between different organizations. And I would like to invite you, as always, to contribute, to help us this mapping. Your inputs will be brought into discussion by Katarina, and you are not completely equal because you don't have a camera and voice, but we consider you as equal participants in this debate. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Anja Djajic. Anja is a research intern on AI at IPFL, and I'll tell you just a few seconds history. A few weeks ago, her parents called and said, hey, our daughter is coming for an internship in Geneva. Could you see if you can help her around? And then I discovered a really great young personality. One of the best students of AI in Belgrade, and now internet in Geneva. And in our chats, I always, when my wife and I used to meet her to see if she needs any help in Geneva, she didn't need any help, I always ask, what is her experience in discovering the Geneva landscape. Therefore, I think this is the excellent intro to hear her view. Anya, tell us first what you are working on briefly and how you see this Geneva landscape as a very young person in early 20s at the beginning of, I'm sure, great career in artificial intelligence. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jovan, for these nice words and both for invitation and opportunity to participate in this webinar along with these remarkable speakers. As you mentioned, I'm here at the internship by EPFL, hosted by Medical Image Processing Laboratory. And the main aim of my internship is to do a medical image segmentation to try to distinguish some implant that is in development by EPFL from the surrounding tissue. But I would say that that's not the greatest value of this internship, is not in a specific project that I'm working on, but is in meeting and connecting with people who come from different parts of the world and from different disciplines with the same goal to apply AI and pattern recognition to try to figure out how human brain works. So for that, here is the team that consists doctors, psychologists, physicists, and engineers as well. And when you take a look at my small surrounding, you can see how Geneva gives really huge impact to global AI society, because this is one cross-disciplinary and cross-cultural research. So we are trying to do some, we have the same goal, but we are coming with totally different backgrounds and joined here in Geneva.
Thank you, Anya. Therefore, you see this element of the cross-fertilization as important contribution of Geneva and what matters for you from your experience over the last few weeks. Thank you for that. Now, let us move, since we are in the medical field, mapping human brain, what Anya said, distinguishing implant tissues from the real tissue, to Amandip, Ambassador Amandip Giebel. Amandip, you are leading one of the projects which is trying to bring AI into medical science. Just building on what just Anya introduced a few seconds ago. Could you develop this narrative a bit more around both your specific research, but in particular this question of connecting the dots in Geneva and beyond?
Thank you so much, Jovan. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with my distinguished co-panelists. And first of all, I want to say how important your work is in terms of connecting the dots, connecting the synapses, as you put it earlier. So otherwise, we keep working in our silos. We don't get to develop an appreciation of the opportunities for collaboration and for joining forces. Our work at the International Digital Health and AI Research Collaborative is about facilitating the paper to digital and the digital to AI transitions in the context of the transformation of health systems. So it's not so much about specific solutions to specific problems such as malaria, TB, medical diagnostics in a particular field, but it's about the end-to-end enabling of solution making. So from the situational awareness of who's doing what's happening in the world on digital health and AI in health, to the digital architectures and data interoperability that supports the application of these technologies to the health arena, and to this important point of transdisciplinarity in crafting solutions, bringing clinical, computer science and other domains together. And then also the kind of distributed infrastructure that's required, the distributed governance that's required for data to stay close to the context of its users, and for AI to be developed in a context respecting manner. So it's a kind of end-to-end enabling that we are looking at in a concrete area of sustainable development, which is health and well-being and partnerships around that. if I may just sum it up, one way of thinking about us is a kind of distributed CERN for AI in health that levels the playing field for knowledge makers and innovators, particularly young researchers and developers from LMICs.
Thank you, Amandeep. We had just this nice takeoff with the health and AI from Anya and you, and now we go just make a slight detour to my co-moderator Kat, who is doing research on AI and diplomacy and the question of context. You just mentioned it, Amandeep, importance of context, and we have been finding this challenge of recreating the context and simulating context in order to overcome cultural, professional divisions in communication. Kat, could you just give us insights what you will be focusing on today?
Yeah, just to echo one thing, I found it really interesting and valuable when Ambassador Gill just mentioned focusing on AI governance to make sure that that it stays close to the context of the users. I think that's extremely important. So in kind of my research, I focus on AI as a topic on diplomatic agendas. This is where the governance comes in. AI as a tool for diplomats, and AI as something that really impacts the environment in which diplomacy is practiced. And what is really interesting is kind of zooming into the idea of AI as a tool for diplomats. And this is very much in its infancy, but as you said, it's really interesting to think about context of these tools, in which context are they applied, about developing these tools, about the kind of cooperation and input needed to even start developing AI tools for diplomatic practice. And then also this question of, as you mentioned, Jovan, AI is a lot about pattern recognition, machine learning pattern recognition, but then who kind of owns these patterns and who kind of reaps the benefits of the pattern that are discovered? And that's one of the discussion we had recently, and that really brings us back to AI governance. What I also found interesting, and this is kind of the second stream of my research, is to kind of look at AI governance, but in particular what different countries are doing. So over the last several years, basically since 2017, we saw countries developing national AI strategies. China was one of the first to develop that, and with a very specific focus. When we look at these strategies, we also see this tension between, on the one hand, competition, and on the other hand, cooperation. And this brings us back to kind of the core of diplomatic practice, how to kind of navigate this tension. I'm going to stop here, but I think this also raises some interesting questions for our panelists here. AI is a tool for diplomats, but also how do we bring different stakeholders together, and what is the role of diplomats both in Geneva, but then also kind of connecting Geneva to the wider world and the discussions happening there at Unesco and in other places.
Thank you, Kat. Basically, what you are arguing based on this research is that issue is getting in relevance in national capitals, and our colleagues, diplomats who are following today's session, will be receiving more and more requests from their headquarters to follow what's going on in AI scene in Geneva, but also in Paris with UNESCO and the other actors. This is important line that will develop further on. Now, since we are moving from health to diplomacy, now we come to cars. And Francois, you are tell us what you're doing in order to make the cars safe, usable, and important tool of our daily reality. Please contribute with your reflection in this very so far dynamic and engaging discussion.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm dealing at UNEC with activities on automated driving systems, and UNEC is working on the automotive sector for 70 years or more. And in the past, the tool that we were using for assessing cars was the hammer. I still have one very broken one from the past. And this time is gone. We had some kind of digitalization of the system, road system. And this reached also the conservative automotive sector. And the cars are connected, the cars are becoming automated with the help of AI. And we have now to adapt. I am myself a mechanical engineer, so very far from AI. And I had to learn because this technology now is in many cars. This is interesting to look at automotive sector because we have now AI in many cars. for speech recognition, for analysis of radar cameras, etc. The sensors, and we have already things to learn from that. We advanced. We do technical regulation at UNECE. So when we are really focusing and in guiding the automotive sector, and now we have to start also regulating maybe AI. We don't want to do that in isolation. We don't even want to really regulate the technology. Usually, we try to be performance-based and not deal with the technology itself. But AI is so specific that we have probably to do things related to the specificities of AI. And we cannot do that in isolation. We see the activities in many countries related to AI, and this was mentioned. There is some part of it which is competitive. Another part of it is to realize how complex this is. And because the activities at the country levels are so similar, there is a role to play for the international community at the United Nations and other organizations. And in order to do this job, we collaborate. And for example, we collaborate with our colleagues from ITU, from the telecommunication side, and they have a lot of knowledge also on the IT side. They help us also with cybersecurity. So you see, there is a role to play for us, and we started already, but we are at the beginning of the journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois. UNECE Economic Commission for Europe is one of the hidden gems in Geneva. Your work is not that known, and we hope to spread this news. It's very impressive work, and you mentioned the one important aspect that we have to move into specifics. I think Amandeep already opened that line. There is a lot of discussion on ethics and AI. It's important discussion, but there is now need to move into specifics and see how in your field of autonomous cars or in health, the AI affects the developments. Katarina introduced this sort of Trinity framing: topic and AI governance, tools that diplomats use, and geostrategic environment. Let's move to the Samir Chauhan, director of a UN ICC center. This is a place which provides tools for the UN system, ICT and digital tools. What are the, Samir, news from the lab of UNICC? I know you have very creative team and you're very proactive on the Geneva scene. What are the news and how you can contribute to these various threads that we have been developing in discussion, in particular on tools? Over to you.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Jovan. Thank you for having me, and a pleasure to be here with the rest of the panelists. We are a shared service function within the UN, designed by the General Assembly to provide shared IT services to the entire UN system and beyond. So interestingly, when I saw the panel composition, ITU, UNECE, and IDEA are all our clients. So we work with all of them in different ways, shapes, or forms. I wanted to give some examples of the kinds of solutions we're working on today that tie into AI. But given the diverse set of partners we work with over 70 different UN agencies and beyond, organizations like IDEA, like OECD and OPCW, OSCE, the development banks and so on, and green energy institutes and so on. We get a plethora of different solutions that we are asked to build. And the way I describe ICC is we are where the rubber hits the road. So after you've mapped out everything and when you want a working solution, you come to ICC and we build it for you. So a case in point is for an investigative tribunal. We built an AI-based solution, which is extremely cutting edge to analyze crimes against humanity. So this is a solution that was built to collect massive amounts of evidence, which is in all the different forms and formats. Could be audio, videos, data in mobile phones and computers. Bring it all together, apply machine learning, and start to build cases against individuals who have committed crimes against humanity. So the technology we built with this tribunal was showcased at the Security Council about 6 months ago. And the intent with which we come to this is not just build it for them, which clearly is what our primary objective is, but a secondary objective is how can we then reuse it for others? So how much of this could be reused for other investigative mechanisms? There are several across the UN. So that's one example. Another example is in robotic process automation. So we started building bots for many, many different UN agencies and all sorts of functions like administration, travel, finance, healthcare, human resources, procurement. And recently, we built a couple of bots for PAHO, which is one of the healthcare organizations based out of Washington, D.C. It's one of WHO's regional offices. And one of the bots, which I think is very relevant to what's happening in the world today, collaborates with the COVAX facility to track the shipment of the vaccines that are being shipped out around the world. So we're training the bot to be able to track the inventory of all the vaccines that are being sent out around the Americas, down to all the most granular level of detail of where is the shipment coming from, what's the expiry date on this, what kind of vaccine is this. So all of that, which would take many, many hours of manual work to track and enter into different ERPs, can now be digitized. And as the AI gets smarter, the goal is that there'll be no human intervention. I'll give one other example, because we work in so many different diverse fields, is around elections. So we're working on elections fraud. So we work to build an application for a joint task force to analyze elections that are happening in different countries and to be able to capture evidence of fraud and prevent it from happening. But the intent is step one, capture, but then step two, start to train an AI behind the scenes so you can start to build some intelligence, so that as you reuse this technology and you reuse this solution across different countries, there's more and more intelligence that can be brought to bear. So I could go on with multiple other examples, but we typically end up at the other end of the spectrum, where we're trying to build working solutions and trying to extend them back to say, can this be reused by the broader community that we support?
Samir,
so I'll pause there. Thank you.
It's really impressive on all of these three examples that you mentioned about the chatbots, about this medical application, and in particular the last one. It's new one, but I'm sure that there will be controversies around it. But if AI can help us to reduce the noise and to make more insights into reliable election, that would be really great contribution to political debates worldwide. I'm sure there will be other comments on various aspects of these applications. Now, Chezub, we build this narrative from the health transportation tools perspective. Now we would like to have you to connect all of these dots into some sort of pattern. This is exactly what you're doing in AI for Good. It is one of the major umbrella initiative in AI field. I know it is very tricky in the UN system to say that you are AI institutions or hub, because then there will be a sort of discussion who has a mandate, and you are very modest in it. You do it bottom up, but in reality, AI for Good Summit, AI for Good initiative is probably one of the most comprehensive in the international system, comprehensive places to connect various dots. Help us with finding the patterns in the inputs so far. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jovan. It's my pleasure to join this very interesting webinar. I think I personally, as your subject, IoT and AI and IoT, as a technicians, as one of guys to start with this IoT from year 2008. I was a chairman of that group. So I heavily engaged with this IoT space, and AI is my master grade paper around 35 years ago, pattern recognition and robots. I'm engaged with this. And now I'm working in the ITU as an ICT development platform of the UN systems. As you said, I think it's very happy to see many colleagues already identify specific dot areas. As you said, Jovan, ITU, we are very pleased to have a collaboration with many UN organizations to address how AI is helpful for our society. AI for Good, we started from year 2017. When it started this AI for Good, normally people raise many concerns because they might be negatively influenced from the blockbuster movies. So many think about this robot is a Terminator, yeah? But so that was seriously hit ITU. What is always talking about negative side, loss of jobs and ethical issue. But ITU, we think about as a technical platform, what is how we can look at positive side of AI and IoT. That is our conclusion. So that's the reason we set up our title, AI for Good, especially as a UN organization, how we can meet how we can drive this movement to meet Sustainable Development Goals, which is set by UN very clearly year 2030. That's what we started this AI for Good Global Summit. At the beginning, we are very lucky to get some good collaboration with the WHO addressing AI for health. That is a starting point, how we bring which specific subject AI will help. During this exercise, we identified it might be very good to make we called benchmarking models, how we can ensure AI algorithm and how we can show this data set. So this group, AI for Health group, to start off this our study, how we can ensure algorithm and data set. That is a starting point. And afterwards, we expand our scope. As Francois said, we already have some of very specialized groups to identify AI capabilities as an autonomous driver. We try to identify what is the framework, how we can ensure AI as a driver for autonomous driving. And just before joining of this webinar, I just opening another webinar called AI for disaster, natural disaster management. So that is another very, very important areas because we believe AI will help for better predictions if we have enough analysis of these previous disasters, if we collect correct data. As you recognize, this summer we had a very serious natural disasters in many, many areas, including wildfires still going on. So this kind of things is a very important element we have to address. So ITO is now, so we are getting more collaborations with UN organizations. Definitely ITO, we have over 900 industry members. So industry is getting together. So I want to say at this moment is AI for Good is already setting platforms. We don't want monopolize anything. Platform is just a tool again, same as AI. All of you talk about AI as a tool for us. AI for Good platform is another tool, how we can bring different dots and how we can find our mapping together, find our solutions. So our current strategy is AI for Good platform is bring problem owners. Anyone have problems to solve, get some of a solution from AI, IoT, any ICTs. And we are also invite anyone who willing to challenge that to solve their problems who already have some solutions. So this would be good platforms for all of us. I want to stop here for the moment.
Thank you, Chazub. Therefore, for our audience, if you have a problem, well, technical one, just call AI for Good. And I can tell you, Chazub answers emails. He is a very engaging international civil servant, and it's a pleasure to work with you. And we'll get back to some points, including the question of standards, which is the main focus of your department. But before we go into the next round of comments, where we'll ask our panelists to start connecting closer the dots, let us hear from Katarina. First, what's going on in our chat rooms? What are the questions, comments? And Katarina, any comment from your side on discussion so far?
Yeah, thank you, Jovan. Just a quick question. I have 3 questions for our panelists. Can I go for 3 instead of like 1 or 2? Is that okay?
Yes,
okay,
3, and then we'll ask panelists immediately after. Yeah.
Yeah, so quite a rich discussion in our chat here and also on the other platforms where we're streaming this discussion. So thank you for your active participation and some of the interesting points you're bringing up. I have basically 3 areas, meaning the 3 questions I alluded to. So the first question is basically within this project of Geneva Atlas, we're talking a lot about connecting the dots between different Geneva entities. And we had this in the discussion here as well. But then kind of taking this a little bit further, I was wondering if the panelists can reflect a bit more on how to connect to other organizations not based in Geneva, or how this impacts the Geneva discussion. So what I'm thinking about, of course, is UNESCO. We already heard mention the UN Security Council. But for example, also things like the EU, the proposed EU regulation on AI, how this kind of comes into the Geneva ecosystem, but also how you perhaps try to connect all these different dots. So that's the first question. Second question, looking at Geneva Diplomats specifically, do you have what is your advice or recommendation for them as they kind of, perhaps even as new diplomats, newly posted to Geneva, as they enter this sometimes perhaps complicated ecosystem, and especially with regards to artificial intelligence, as you mentioned, which is becoming more and more important, and capitals will be asking their diplomats to kind of brief them and keep them up to date on these discussions on AI in Geneva. So what is your recommendation for them? That's the second question. And then third question, I want to piggyback on a specific question that was asked to Ambassador Gill by Amir. The question is, how can we avoid and prevent the phenomenon of hacking bodies and minds via marriage of AI, health, brains, and biology? A very specific question, but perhaps I want to branch out a bit and ask everyone to kind of reflect about, or share their reflections on the kind of harm that can come from AI and how they think about that, how they try to prevent that in their work. And even Anya, I would be interested in your opinion as well, because you look at image recognition in the health sector. So as you work on that, do you think about the potential harm or a misuse, or some of the challenges that can arise from your work? So I'm going to stop here with these three questions. I guess it's a bit of a buffet for everyone to pick and choose. But first of all, over to you, Jovan.
Thank you, Katarina, for really great questions. Since there is a specific question for Amandeep, you may answer this specific question and then reflect on the other two questions, which the first one is connecting the dots wider beyond Geneva, and also what is advice for young diplomats or diplomats in general, since you were in their shoes till recently representing India in various fora. Therefore, you can empathize with the colleague diplomats. Over to you, Amandeep.
Thank you, Katarina. Thank you, Jovan. I think this question about potential harm from AI needs to be placed in perspective. So I think we are still far from those kind of capabilities that allow us to hack into brains or hack into bodies at will. So fortunately, a lot of this remains in the realm of science fiction. But there are immediate dangers and risks. For example, pulse oximeters, which have been used everywhere in the COVID response, they don't work that well with darker skin. So there's a need to reinforce diversity in data sets, to develop algorithms in the right context so that they don't cause harm. Because if you are being misdiagnosed with the level of oxygen in your blood, you may face some grave consequences from that. On the advice to diplomats, I think in Geneva, there is such rich pickings. So you have to prioritize your time well. And I would recommend to young diplomats to go out of their offices, meet as many people as they can, even if they are focusing on one aspect, let's say lethal autonomous weapon systems and discussions in the disarmament forums. Try and find some time to hang out at the AI for Good Summit, where they can meet the developers and others who are applying AI for good, so that they can see how they are governing that side of AI, and there might be some lesson. And also cutting across fields, the transportation domain, the fact that you need to have human control within a certain amount of time in an autonomous car. It's very similar to the kind of human control problems you come across with autonomous weapon systems. So there are lessons to be learned across domains and across different, yes, and connecting to other places. I think Paris, both OECD and UNESCO, the AI ethics group, I was fortunate to be part of that. Some of the governance work that's been done in Paris is relevant. Many other places, New York, Global Pulse and others are quite active. But I think more and more in Nairobi, in Lagos, in South Africa, you see AI conferences happening, specific events happening, and there's a lot of exciting talent and ideas out there. And we need to connect with those as well.
Thank you, Amandeep, especially for bringing this practical and concrete advices and development countries' perspective. We'll just ask Anya for a quick comment before we move to the other panelists. Anya, you're at the beginning of your career in AI. You're now doing this pattern recognition. Are you asking questions that were asked by one of the panelists on the ethics? What about your colleagues? Are you just driven by excitement of discovery, or from time to time you step back and you look across the lake to Villa Diodati and see what dilemmas the Frankenstein had when he created this perfect creature?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, when it comes to usage of artificial intelligence in medical purposes, for now, I see that it can be used as some kind of help to doctors for some diagnosis. So there is, of course, some kind of misuse where we are losing that doctor-patient maybe relation. But for now, I don't think that artificial intelligence systems are ready to be used by itself, but just to maybe help doctors and to just say, hey, this might be something that's significant in this MRI, and then to maybe speed up the procedure for getting diagnosis and medical treatments as a help to them. So because I think that those systems can make errors, and for misdetection of some diseases, it's really, really bad. So far, I think that they are really great to help to get the diagnosis, but not to use them just by itself.
Therefore, we have AA, Anya and Amandeep agreement that we should be careful about use from two perspectives. One, researcher starting research, and Amandeep experienced diplomat researcher in this field. Now, let me just develop on one thread which was mentioned, and we have now few threads. One, Francois, there was a question of moving in specificities, and Katarina mentioned European Union new regulation, AI governance, which is very impressive in a sense that it is moving to concrete issues. It's basically saying, okay, what is new with AI? What can be regulated with the other issues? Now, could you reflect on that, on specificities, moving from the big narratives of science fiction ethics to specificities in your field, and in particular relations with Brussels, because this link Geneva-Brussels is becoming increasingly important with the growing relevance of hard digital power in Brussels, where companies are opening their lobbying offices, and Geneva's soft digital power. Over to you, Francois.
Thank you. Yes, so we work very closely with the colleagues in Brussels. There is this, I think it's a draft regulation or a new regulation. And because we are working very closely with Brussels on vehicle regulations, I think the framework directive in Brussels is referring to maybe 90 or 100 of our UN regulations for technical aspects related to vehicles. So technically they took out of the scope of the directive or the regulation in Brussels, the aspect related to automotive. There are some aspects that are general and that will apply also to automotive, but they took out of the scope the technical aspect related to automotive so that they can work also with Geneva on the technical regulations also applicable for this technology AI. So we are very connected, and in UNECE we are basically just a forum, world forum where the expertise is coming from the diplomats, from the technical experts with the diplomats, and also from the NGOs. And many NGOs are also representing the industry, the automotive sector, and others. So it's very interesting. You speak about harm, and when I asked about that to some industry representative, they took it on the statistical level, and I was very surprised. They were saying the problem they face is that people believe that AI is helping to establish causal links between things, and they just had to establish some correlation. And they were telling me, they were, concluding that any activity which is data-led, like data-led policy, is wrong. We should always keep the science approach. We should not concentrate only on the data and the outcomes, but we should really have a science-based approach, because we should check causalities, we should check correlations, and we should check many other aspects. So long story short, it means that the biggest harm is probably over expectations from the technology. So we should always keep it in mind. And these are the type of things that we are working with, for example, with the European Union, Brussels, of course, because they are very close and they rely on Geneva for many regulations, but we work also with our colleagues from the USA, from China, from India, Japan, Korea on these aspects. So we really try to bring the expertise here in Geneva without ignoring what is happening out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Francois, for this additional connections. Shezub, Amandip mentioned this question of development aspect. I know that in the ITU work, the question of development is very high on the agenda. But there is a realistic question. How many of participants from developing countries we have in AI debates? Is it resonating well? There was, Amandip mentioned the conferences are starting happening in Nairobi, Lagos, in Asia, probably more in Latin America. Could you tell us more on that linkage, how AI is taking off in developing countries, and what can be done from Geneva with the diplomats from developing countries to foster that debate a bit more?
Yeah, actually, from on the ITU case, I don't want to say this applied to the all general UN systems, but at the list of this ITU case, this developing regions, especially LDCs, which assuming as ICT infrastructure is not well equipped, and also the end user devices is not enough to manage of this AI or data properly. So they had more suffer. So we say of these digital gaps in AI space is much wider than other space, because their device, their infrastructure is not allowed to them. As an example case, last year we had, after pandemic, my bureau, Standard Works, completely, we operate the remote participation. All areas, especially developed countries, areas very well increase more than 50–80% of participation, because it's very convenient. Only one area, LDC areas, decrease the participation because their ability is not good enough. Okay, that's the actual situation. So let me say AI, who's going to be develop enough capabilities to develop AI? That's a few countries. And let me say that very few within 10, less than 10 numbers, I would say industry, they have enough capabilities to develop rural AI systems. So how we can disseminate of this is a big challenge for us. Taking this opportunity, Jovan, address of Katharine's question, I agree with this. So even partially of this your question as well, we are trying to reach our region and the national level as much as possible, because we utilize AI. One of the features of this AI is tailoring for our specific community. Like we are getting supported like machine learning translation, so machine learning interpretations, and reach to the specific community. This is what we have now. ITU is working on this regard. So we try to reach them as much as possible. Even we are international organization, but our event time to time address very specific case of a specific country. This is one thing. And second one is like a diplomat of this recommendation is, as Amandeep already recommended, but please contact technical group as much as possible. Geneva, you have all UN systems have their own specific expertise. Without understanding the technical nature, it's very, very difficult. Like AI, IoT is a very complicated subject. Maybe in this regard, I want to share with one of my, as a technical expert, my perspective of this AI and data. I don't believe AI, we identified single AI algorithm to apply all the people. That's not going to happen. One of the big technical nature of AI is diversity, variety. We have one AI algorithm for specific application, but should be have many different types according to the human natures, geographical location, historical background, all things we have to expect AI algorithms should be diverse.
Your point is on what I think Francois also brought on specificities, moving to the specific concern and needs. And it is really worrying what you said that, let's say, Zoom meeting or inclusion through online conferencing reduced participation of LDCs. We expected a counter effect that they will have a new chance, but your statistic shows that there is a reduction. And the warning that AI is increasing the gap because of the need for huge processing power. Therefore, we have some really strong signals that something needs to be done. And I'm sure that colleagues who are following today's discussion and others should focus more on it. Thank you, Chezub. Let's move to Samir. Samir, there was this question from Katarina and from audience on connecting various other players. And you mentioned in your introduction that you support UN Security Council, and you mentioned a few other WHO. Could you reflect more on that aspect of let's say, pan-UN initiatives and what can be done in this field? Before we move to the closing remarks and the closing reflections, building on what Amandeep said, advice for diplomats, how better to cover digital, and I think Chezub gave a few inputs. Over to you, Samir.
Thank you so much, Jovan. So yes, we do support the entire UN system across Geneva and beyond. So we do try and find common themes and common ways to adopt and reuse the technology, as I alluded to earlier. But to the broader question of how do we make sure that what's being built in Geneva and ideated can be adopted more broadly, I think Geneva, in my experience, I've been here for about 3 years, has such an amazing critical mass of expertise in different areas, whether you're talking about healthcare between WHO and Gavi and IDER now and others, and ITU and ILO and others, that I think a lot of very deep cross-functional thinking happens here. And if I think Diplo is bringing in another very interesting point into this to say, how do we bring diplomats up to speed? So in my opinion, I think Geneva has a lot to offer in terms of how can all of this technology be built in a way that is sector specific, but also there's some common themes, that it is something that is geared for everybody. There are no biases built into it. It is adoptable by different regions of the world. So I think Geneva has a lot to offer for some of the solutions, because we always end up building very specific solutions. We are encountering that on a daily basis. We adopt certain commercial solutions and we customize it for our UN clients. And we realize there's biases built into that solution. So it does not work as well in certain regions of the world, or it doesn't, or in one case, we're trying to build a solution which scans delegates coming into conferences. And we're realizing the AI is biased against certain geographies, or certain kinds of people. So we have to uncover the bias and then find ways to reduce that bias. So that's our contribution into this. But I think the overall ecosystem here is so rich that, in my opinion, Geneva has a massive amount to offer. And discussions like this to try and bring those different groups together is super essential.
Thank you. Samir, before we invite all our panelists to say a few words about advice to diplomats and others to follow very concrete advice, we will just mention one aspect which was echoing through your comments. is basically about reducing the hype. We have to be very careful and say what AI can do and cannot do. And next month, our tour is focusing on media tour. We noticed that media coverage, including very prestigious newspapers and media outlets, is not necessarily proper, not only for AI, but also for cybersecurity, standardization, and other issues. Therefore, next month, during the month of September, we'll try to bring Geneva media outlets, but also international ones, to reflect on AI. What is realistic? Can really AI machine replace diplomats or journalists, as we have been hearing from some very serious newspapers? Therefore, that will be important hype control. Now, I would like to invite Kat to your concluding remarks or questions, and then we'll ask panelists for a 1 minute advice and a suggestion to all of us how to make next step and how to fine-tune these patterns that we started outlining during today's discussion. Kat.
Thank you, Jovan. Just two quick points. I think the most important thing when we look at AI and machine learning is, for me, is kind of an ethical question. How do we make sure that those most in need actually benefit from the technology and are not harmed by the technology? And then the second point, perhaps more for diplomats and the Geneva ecosystem. How do we really make sure that developing countries are not left behind? And I think there needs to be a lot more done in terms of sharing technology, in terms of bringing people into these kind of conversations.
Good. Thank you, Kat. We have a specific question here, which probably should go to Amandeep, because Amandeep was also chair of the laws negotiation. Amandeep, question is, where issues of AI weaponization should be discussed in the UN framework in integrated way? Laws in Geneva, AI ethics in Paris, New York open-ended working group, AI for good at ITO. I think the Amir is commenting, we need an inclusive and multilateral platform in the UN to set up international framework. Over to you, Amandeep. And you may reflect also, make concluding remark from our discussion.
Thanks, Jovan. I think the inclusive framework is already there. The CCW here in Geneva, where there are 125 governments, NGOs, civil society, Red Cross, everyone can participate, and negotiations are going on there. It's also the right, in a sense, anchoring, because you have the issue of accountability under international humanitarian law and the issues of arms control and international security captured in this forum. I don't think the ITU's AI for Good Summit is the forum for discussing weaponization, nor is UNESCO, and UNESCO has clarified that aspect quite clearly. So very quickly, I think in summing up, Geneva has a key role. The diplomats here, their capacity development is essential, important transdisciplinary capacity development. And also, they are an important conduit, a channel to work back home, particularly in developing countries where new institutions, new entrepreneurs are emerging. So they should also think about what is the footprint back home of their reporting. If it is just going back to the foreign ministry or to the IT ministry in terms of the standards work, then I think we are not kind of capturing the rich evidence that's emerging on the ground. So I would just add that small point to our rich discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Amandeep, Francois, you already elaborated on one of the channel, anything towards Brussels, anything else to advise diplomats what they should focus on, what should be your takeaway from this discussion?
Thank you. Well, I agree with many things which were said already. Maybe just to add something, I think the importance is also that the diplomats in different locations also liaise together. So the diplomats based in Brussels, in Paris, in New York, also could have stronger links sometimes, because I feel in my job that sometimes what is happening in Geneva might not always be known by other colleagues in other places. So maybe this is something that can be increased also. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois. Samir, concluding message from your side.
Certainly. Thank you, Jovan. So specifically to the diplomats here, my position is they need to come up the curve, and Amandeep referred to capacity building. They need to understand this is the new world we are in. And all the diplomats in Geneva, especially, I think there's organizations like the Diplo Foundation that offer excellent training. So I think they need to take advantage of that to come up the curve and understand what are the topics and what are the issues they should be raising in these discussions when they go back and have a discussion, whether it's a WTO or ILO. More and more, there'll be conversations tied to data and AI and bias. So they need to be prepared for that. Geneva has both the ability to train them through various forums, and then also whether they go into these conversations or they go for AI for good, they should be attending those, because the context becomes much more specific and clearer when they go for those kind of conferences. So I think the onus is, in some sense, if I can, is on them to come up the curve, because they are truly representing their nations in this in these discussions. And this will have a long-term impact on can we bring everybody else along? Or will it be just those top countries, 10 countries that Chesu referred to, who are driving the agenda?
That was Samir. Moving beyond G10 to G193. This is a real challenge.
Absolutely.
Chesu, any advice from your side how to move to AI 193 or G193? Unmute, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, what I want to invite of this Geneva Diplomat become gateway to collect problems and also invite solution providers. This is a big challenge, as all panelists already said. So this collaboration platform is already there. Issue is how we can identify such specifics. AI development from the industry, from the market is so fast. So it's a really, this subject should be beyond the talk show. It's the world, the market is not waiting. Even our citizens, it's difficult to get benefit from this technical development. So I'm sure if this all diplomats has become gateway and the Geneva diplomatic environment to become platforms, working platform, collaborating platform, we will reach very good stage. In every year, we can improve quite fastly. So as my conclusion remarks is, I want to invite all of these diplomats to become gateway and the UN systems becoming platform.
Great. We have a new metaphor, gateway. Chesu, I'm sure there will be quite a few phone calls. Anya, we started discussion with you. I know this is the new terminology, everything new for you. What would be your takeaway from this discussion as being a really newcomer to Geneva scene?
Well, I'm really happy to hear all of those dots, because they're as well connecting in my head, because you opened so many new questions and new fields for AI research for my future development. So I'm very happy to contribute here, and I think that what the people that are new in AI should be aware are some limits that we have, and to know what is possible with AI today and what is not, because I think that it's kind of mystified to people that are not in this field. So for instance, that you mentioned that the next month will be AI in media, so people can know that there are some limits what we can do today. So I think that is as well really important to be aware.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you, Chesu. Thank you, Amandeep, Francois, Samir, Katarina, our colleague in the team, Marco, and other colleagues for ensuring that this, let's say, Geneva synapses, if you can call it, started firing. It's a Monday morning. It's day after the weekend, but based on this discussion, I can see that it is a really relevant topic. It is a topic on mind of everybody, not only in your official capacities as diplomats, journalists, academics, but also as citizens. And our tour, our journey continues next month. I can see there will be quite a few colleagues from this discussion, which will try to help journalists to understand what we are discussing in AI, cybersecurity, and other issues. I would like to invite all of you to mentally congratulate our panelists, because we cannot have easily upload, and thank them for a great contribution. Thank you for your comments and questions, and see you next week for discussion on the media coverage of digital issues. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amandeep.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.